I sat there on March 15th, 2019. In downtown Manhattan, my name is Michael Harrison, and I'm about to tell you the most insane story of betrayal, mystery, and ultimate revenge you've ever heard. Trust me when I say this, nothing in my life prepared me for what was coming. And to my beloved son, Richard Harrison Jr., the lawyer droned on, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, I bequeath my entire estate, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $80 million. $80 million. I felt my stomach drop like I'd been pushed off a skyscraper. My older brother Richard, Rick as everyone called him, sat across from me with this smug little smile playing on his lips. He didn't even look surprised. Of course he didn't, he'd probably known for years. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. And to my younger son, Michael Harrison, I leave my 1967 Chevrolet Impala, currently stored in the garage at 445 Maple Drive, and all its contents. That was it. That was my inheritance, a car. A rusty old beaten-up car that my father had kept in storage for over 30 years. Rick let out this little snort, not quite a laugh, but close enough to make my blood boil. "Hey, Mikey," he whispered across the table. "At least you can sleep in it when you can't afford rent anymore." I wanted to punch him right there. 32 years of brotherhood, and this is what it came down to. Him with everything, me with nothing but a car that probably didn't even run. Is there nothing else?" I asked the lawyer, my voice cracking embarrassingly. "No explanation? No letter?" The lawyer, his name was Gerald Mitchum, I'll never forget it, shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid not, Mr. Harrison. Your father was very specific in his instructions. The will is ironclad, witnessed, and legally sound. I'm very sorry, everyone was so damn sorry. My father, Richard Harrison Sr., had died 2 weeks earlier on March 1st, 2019. Heart attack at 73. Quick, they said. Didn't suffer much, they said. I'd cried at his funeral, genuinely mourned him, thought about all the good times we'd had when I was a kid. Now I just felt angry, and confused, and utterly betrayed. Let me back up and explain something about my family. My brother Rick was always the favorite, always. From the time we were kids, everything revolved around him. Rick was the firstborn, arriving on June 12th, 1981. I came along 4 years later on October 8th, 1985. By the time I was old enough to understand family dynamics, the pecking order was already established. Rick was the golden child, the heir apparent, the one who could do no wrong. He went to Yale. I went to community college. He joined Dad's real estate development company right out of school. I became a high school history teacher. He married Amanda, a lawyer from a wealthy Connecticut family. I was still single at 33, nursing a broken engagement from 2 years prior. Don't get me wrong, I loved teaching. I loved my kids at Jefferson High School in Brooklyn. I loved making a difference, even if it was one student at a time. But I won't lie and say I didn't feel the sting of comparison every single time we had a family dinner. "Michael's doing just fine teaching those inner-city kids," Dad would say, in that tone that suggested teaching was a cute hobby rather than a real career. "Not everyone needs to be a millionaire, right, Mike?" Then he'd turn to Rick and spend the next hour discussing business deals, property acquisitions, and investment strategies I could barely follow. My mother died when I was 12. Ovarian cancer. November 1997. After that, it was just Dad, Rick, and me. And somehow, without Mom there to balance things out, the favoritism got worse. So yeah, when the lawyer read out that will, I wasn't completely shocked. Hurt? Absolutely. Devastated? You bet. But shocked? Not really. What did shock me was the car. 3 days after the will reading, on March 18th, 2019, I drove out to the storage facility in Queens where Dad had kept his old Chevy. It was one of those places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. Rusted metal buildings, cracked pavement, weeds growing through every crack. Unit 237. That's where my inheritance waited. I rolled up the squeaky metal door, and there it was, the 1967 Chevrolet Impala. Forest green, or at least it used to be before decades of dust had turned it a uniform gray. The chrome bumpers were tarnished, the tires were flat, and one of the back windows had a crack running through it. This was worth leaving me in a will. This hunk of junk? I circled around it slowly, my emotions swinging between anger and sadness. This car meant something to Dad once. I remembered him talking about it when I was really little before Mom died. He'd bought it brand new in 1967, the year he graduated from college. His first major purchase, his pride and joy. Then he'd parked it here sometime in the late 80s and apparently never looked at it again. I tried the driver's side. Door. Locked, of course. The lawyer had given me a small envelope with 2 keys, one for the storage unit, one for the car. My hand shook a little as I unlocked the door. It creaked open with a sound like a dying animal. The inside smelled like old leather, motor oil, and something else. Something sweet and musty like old paper. The bench seats were cracked, the dashboard was faded, and there was a layer of dust over everything thick enough to write your name in. I sat down in the driver's seat and immediately felt a spring poking through the upholstery into my back. Perfect. Just perfect. Thanks, Dad, I said out loud to the empty storage unit. This is exactly what I needed. Not money for my student loans, not help with rent, just a useless old car that probably doesn't even... That's when I noticed it. The glove compartment wasn't quite closed. Just a tiny gap, maybe a 1/4 inch, like something was preventing it from shutting completely. I leaned over and pulled it open. Inside was a thick manila envelope, bulging with contents sealed with yellowed tape. My heart started beating faster. This was it. The explanation, the real inheritance, the thing Dad had meant for me to find. Maybe there was a check in there, or at least a letter explaining why he'd done this to me. I ripped open the envelope. What I found inside would change my entire life. The first thing that fell out was a stack of photographs, maybe 30 or 40 of them. Black and white, color, Polaroids, all different eras. I picked up the top one. It showed my father, maybe 30 years old, standing next to the very car I was sitting in. He looked happy, his arm around a woman who definitely wasn't my mother. I frowned and flipped to the next photo. Same woman, different location. They were at the beach. She was laughing, her head thrown back, my father gazing at her like she'd hung the moon. The next photo showed them kissing. My stomach twisted. An affair? Dad had an affair? But as I kept flipping through the photos, I realized these weren't recent. Based on Dad's appearance and the style of the photos, these were from the late 60s, early 70s, before he'd even met my mother. So who was this woman? I set the photos aside and looked at the other contents of the envelope. There were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my father at various addresses in New York. The return address on each envelope was from a Margaret Sullivan in Boston. I opened the most recent one, dated August 15, 1986, just a year after I was born. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. "My dearest Richard," it began. "I know you won't write back. You never do, but I need you to know that Christopher started first grade this week. He looks so much like you. The same eyes, the same stubborn set to his jaw. He asks about his father sometimes. I tell him you're a great man who had to make difficult choices. I don't know if that's true anymore. I loved you. I still love you. But loving you is like loving a ghost. Please, if you've ever cared about me at all, at least send something for your son. He deserves to know you exist. All my love, Margaret." I read it 3 times, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Christopher, your son, his father. My father had another child. I had a brother. Not Rick, another brother I'd never known about. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the letter. I forced myself to keep reading through the stack. There were letters from 1970, 1975, 1980, 1985, all saying similar things. Margaret had been pregnant. She'd had the baby. She was struggling financially. She needed help. Please help. Please acknowledge your son. And my father had... What? Just stored these letters in his car and never responded? But there was more in the envelope. Much more. I found a birth certificate. Christopher Sullivan, born March 3, 1970 in Boston, Massachusetts. Father, Richard Harrison Sr. Mother, Margaret Sullivan. I found medical bills, all unpaid, with "past due" stamped in red across them. I found newspaper clippings, obituaries. Margaret Sullivan died September 12, 2001, age 53. After a long battle with breast cancer, she was dead. She died 18 years ago, and my father had never told anyone. But the documents that made me literally gasp out loud were at the bottom of the pile. Legal documents. Official, notarized, scary legal documents. The first was a paternity test from 1971, confirming that Richard Harrison Sr. was indeed the biological father of Christopher Sullivan, 99.9% probability. The second was a lawsuit filed against my father in 1987, seeking child support for Christopher Sullivan. My father had fought it according to the court documents and eventually settled out of court for a lump sum of $50,000 once. For 17 years of being a father to a child he'd abandoned, I felt sick. But the document that made me stop breathing entirely was the last one. It was dated January 8, 2019, less than 2 months before my father died, and it was a letter from a private investigator. Mr. Harrison, it read, "As you requested, I have located your son, Christopher Sullivan. He currently resides in Portland, Maine, where he works as a marine mechanic. He is married to Jennifer Sullivan, née Thompson, and they have 2 daughters, ages 7 and 4. Mr. Sullivan has struggled financially throughout his life, never completing college due to his mother's illness and subsequent medical debts. He currently lives paycheck to paycheck in a rented apartment and has no knowledge of your identity or whereabouts, as his mother never revealed your name to him. Per your instructions, I have not made contact. Attached, please find photographs and a comprehensive background report." Attached to this letter were photos of a man in his late 40s, my age basically, who looked startlingly like my father. Same jawline, same nose, same eyes. He was standing outside a small repair shop, grease on his hands, laughing at something. He looked happy despite everything, happy with nothing, and my father had known. He'd known exactly where his abandoned son was, known he was struggling, known he had grandchildren he'd never met, and he'd done nothing. No, that wasn't quite true. He'd done something. He'd left me this car, with these documents. Why? I sat in that car for 3 hours, reading through everything multiple times, trying to make sense of it all. My father had abandoned a son, had denied him for 49 years, had let him and his mother struggle while he built a real estate empire worth $80 million. And then he'd left everything to Rick, the legitimate son, the proper heir. But he'd left me this evidence, this secret, this bomb. Why? The more I thought about it, the more pieces started clicking into place. Dad and I had always been different from him and Rick. Rick was just like Dad, ambitious, cutthroat, willing to do whatever it took to get ahead. I remembered once when Rick was in his 20s, he'd screwed over a business partner in a real estate deal. I'd been horrified. Dad had been proud. "That's business, Mikey," Dad had said. "Nice guys finish last," but I'd never wanted to be that person. I'd become a teacher specifically because I wanted to help people, not use them. Maybe Dad had seen that. Maybe at the end of his life, feeling death approaching, he'd felt something, guilt, remorse, about Christopher. Maybe he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge Christopher publicly, couldn't bear to split the family fortune, couldn't face the scandal. But maybe he'd thought that I, soft-hearted, idealistic Michael, would do the right thing if I knew. It was a coward's way out, leaving me to clean up his mess. But it was also a choice. He could have destroyed these documents, could have taken this secret to his grave. Instead, he'd left them for me. A test? A plea? A confession? I didn't know. All I knew was that somewhere in Portland, Maine, there was a 49-year-old man who had no idea his father had just died, who had no idea he had 2 half-brothers, who had no idea there was an $80 million estate that legally he had as much claim to as any of us. I pulled out my phone and Googled Christopher Sullivan Marine Mechanic, Portland, Maine. Sullivan's Marine Repair popped up immediately. The website was basic, clearly DIY with a phone number and address. There was a photo of Christopher, older than the PI's photos, smiling in front of a small garage. "Honest work at honest prices," the tagline read. Sullivan's Marine Repair, where we treat your boat like family. Where we treat your boat like family. The irony was so bitter, I almost laughed. I sat there with my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over the number, my heart pounding. What was I going to do? I didn't call. Not that day. Instead, I drove home to my tiny apartment in Brooklyn, the envelope clutched against my chest like it might disappear if I let go. I spent the entire night unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. Option 1, do nothing. Pretend I never found the documents. Let Rick keep the money. Let Christopher keep living his life in peaceful ignorance. It was the safe choice, the easy choice. Nobody got hurt. Well, nobody knew got hurt. The damage was already done decades ago. But could I live with myself? Could I really let Rick keep money that he didn't deserve any more than Christopher did? Rick, who'd spent his whole life being handed everything. Rick, who'd laughed at me when I got nothing. Option 2. Tell Christopher. Give him the documents. Let him decide whether to fight for his share of the inheritance. This was the right choice morally. Christopher deserved to know who his father was. Deserved to know he had brothers. Deserved his fair share of the estate. But it would destroy our family. Rick would never forgive me. And honestly, the rest of the world would think I was doing it out of spite, trying to take down my brother because I was jealous of his inheritance. Option 3. Tell Rick first. Show him the documents. Give him a chance to do the right thing voluntarily, to share the inheritance with Christopher. I actually laughed out loud at this one. Rick voluntarily give up tens of millions of dollars to a stranger. Rick, who'd once said that homeless people just needed to try harder. Rick, who'd never done a generous thing in his life unless there was something in it for him. Yeah, that wasn't happening. As the sun rose on March 19, 2019, I realized I needed to know more before making any decision. I needed to meet Christopher, see what kind of person he was, make sure he wasn't just going to take the money and turn into another Rick. I called in sick to school, first time in 3 years, and started planning a trip to Portland, Maine. I drove up to Portland on March 22, 2019. It was a Friday, and I'd told myself I was just going to observe, get a sense of Christopher, maybe see him from a distance. I definitely wasn't going to introduce myself or reveal anything. That plan lasted about 3 hours. Sullivan's Marine. Repair was in a working-class neighborhood near the waterfront, tucked between a seafood restaurant and a bait shop. The building was small but well-maintained, with a hand-painted sign that had clearly been redone recently. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like a creep. What was I even doing here? Around 10:30 a.m., a pickup truck pulled up and Christopher got out. He was wearing work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, steel-toed boots. He looked tired but moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. A few minutes later, a customer arrived with a boat engine issue. I watched through the open garage door as Christopher examined it, explaining something to the customer in a patient, friendly way. The customer laughed at something he said. Throughout the day, I watched him work. He was good at his job, clearly respected by his customers. He took a lunch break around noon, sitting outside the shop eating a sandwich from a paper bag, scrolling through his phone. Around 3 p.m., a woman arrived with 2 little girls. Christopher's face lit up when he saw them, a genuine, pure happiness that made my chest ache. He picked up the smaller girl and swung her around while she giggled. His wife, I assumed, kissed him on the cheek. They looked like a happy family, a struggling family. Their car was old, the girl's clothes looked worn, but a happy one. I was about to start my car and drive back to New York when I saw Christopher's wife hand him something. His face fell as he looked at it, some kind of paper or envelope. They talked for a few minutes and I could see stress in his body language. His wife touched his arm comfortingly. One of the little girls tugged on his pants, saying something. He forced a smile and picked her up again, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. Medical bills? Rent? Utility bills? I didn't know, but I recognized that look. I'd seen it on my students' parents' faces plenty of times. The look of someone trying to figure out how to make ends meet, trying to keep their family safe and secure in a world that didn't care. Before I knew what I was doing, I was out of my car and walking across the street. "Excuse me," I called out. "Are you Christopher Sullivan?" He turned, and up close the resemblance to our father was even more striking. Same green eyes, same slight cleft in the chin. "Yeah, that's me," he said, his voice friendly but cautious. The voice of a small business owner approached by a stranger. "Can I help you with something? Got a boat that needs work?" I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. My name is Michael. Michael Harrison." I watched his face carefully, but there was no recognition. Why would there be? He didn't know that name meant anything. "Nice to meet you, Michael," he said, extending a hand. I shook it. His grip was strong, calloused from years of hard work. "What can I do for you?" His wife and daughters were watching us curiously. "I'm actually not here about a boat," I said, my heart pounding. "I'm here. This is going to sound crazy, but I'm here because I think we might be related." His smile faltered. "Related how?" I think we might be brothers." There was a long moment of silence. His wife took a step closer, her hand going to Christopher's arm protectively. "I don't have any brothers," Christopher said slowly. My mom raised me alone. She never even told me who my father was. I know, I said. I know she didn't, but I have documents, evidence that my father, Richard Harrison Sr., was also your father. He died a few weeks ago. Christopher's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger. Is this some kind of scam? His wife asked sharply. Because if you're trying to— I'm not trying to scam anyone, I said quickly. I promise. Look, I know this is insane. I only found out about you myself a few days ago. I found these documents in my father's old car. I held up the envelope. Birth certificate, letters from your mother, a paternity test, everything. Christopher stared at the envelope like it might explode. Chris, his wife said quietly, maybe we should at least look at what he's got. Yeah, he said, his voice hollow. Yeah, okay. We sat in the small office at the back of Christopher's shop. His wife, Jennifer, had taken the girls to get ice cream. Sensing this was a conversation that needed to happen in private, I spread the documents out on his desk, watching as Christopher picked them up one by one. His hands were shaking. He read the letters from his mother first. I watched tears form in his eyes as he read her words, her pleas, her love for a man who'd never loved her back. She never told me, he whispered. She never said his name. I asked her, hundreds of times growing up, and she just said my father was someone who couldn't be in our lives. I thought maybe he was married, or maybe he died, or maybe he just didn't want me. But she never— He picked up one of the photographs, the one of our father and his mother at the beach, both of them young and laughing. She looked so happy here, he said. I've never seen her look this happy in any photos I have of her. I'm sorry, I said, inadequate as those words were. I'm so sorry he did this to you. To her. Christopher set down the photo and picked up the birth certificate, stared at it for a long time. Richard Harrison Sr., he read aloud. That was his name. That was my father's name. Yeah. And you're his son too? Yeah. I have an older brother too, Rick. He's 38. Christopher did the math in his head. So I'm the oldest. I'm older than both of you. By 11 years. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. 11 years. He abandoned me, then went on to have 2 more sons. A whole other family, like I never existed. He was a coward, I said. What he did to you and your mother was unforgivable. Did he ever? Christopher's voice cracked. Did he ever talk about me? Did he ever even think about me? I showed him the private investigator's report from January. He hired someone to find you, 2 months before he died, so he knew where you were. He knew about your wife, your daughters, your life. He knew you were struggling. But he didn't come, Christopher said flatly. He was dying. He knew where I was, and he still didn't come. No, he didn't. Why are you here then? Why are you telling me this? This was it, the moment of truth, because he died 3 weeks ago, and he left an estate worth about $80 million. He left all of it to my brother Rick. Nothing to me, nothing to you. But these documents prove you're his son. You have just as much legal right to that money as Rick does. Probably more since you're actually the oldest. Christopher stared at me. $80 million, he repeated. Give or take. And you came all the way up here to tell me this. To give me ammunition to fight for a share of it. He leaned back in his chair. Why? What's in it for you? It was a fair question. Honestly, revenge at first, I admitted. My brother Rick is an asshole. He laughed when I got nothing in the will. And yeah, part of me wanted to see his face when he found out he might have to share. But then I watched you with your family today. I saw how hard you work, how much you love your wife and kids, how you've built a good life out of nothing, with no help from anyone. And I realized you deserve this. You deserve to know the truth. You deserve your fair share. Christopher was quiet for a long time. $80 million, he said again, like he couldn't quite wrap his head around the number. That's not real. That's not money real people have. It is for Rick. And you got nothing? Just the car these documents were in. Christopher looked at me with something like pity. Your own father screwed you over too, huh? Yeah, different way than he screwed you over, but yeah. So what do? Sue, fight this in court? I don't have money for lawyers. I can barely afford to fix the roof that's leaking at home. I have copies of all these documents, I said. Legal proof of paternity. I think any lawyer would take this case on contingency. They'd get paid a percentage of what we win. This is pretty open and shut. We? Yeah, we. I want to fight this too. I want Rick to pay for a lifetime of being an entitled asshole. I want justice for you and your mother. And honestly, I wouldn't mind a fair share myself. Christopher smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. I like you, Michael. You're honest. That's rare. So you'll do it? You'll fight for this? He looked down at the documents spread across his desk. Proof of his father's cowardice, his mother's love, a lifetime of abandonment. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'll fight for it. Not even for the money, really. For my mom. She deserved better. She deserved someone to stand up for her. Then let's do it. We shook hands. Brothers, united for the first time in our lives. I called Rick on March 25, 2019, 3 days after meeting Christopher. Hey, little brother, he answered, his voice full of false cheer. How's poverty treating you? Getting good mileage on that piece of shit car? Rick, we need to talk. In person. It's about Dad's estate. The estate that's mine. What about it? Can you meet me tomorrow? Starbucks on 47th Street, 10 a.m.? This better not be you begging for money, Mikey, because you know I'd love to help you out. But I've got a fiduciary responsibility to Dad's legacy. Just meet me, Rick. Trust me, you'll want to hear this. He showed up 15 minutes late, because of course he did. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, his hair perfectly styled, his smile obnoxiously confident. So what's this about? He asked, not even bothering to order coffee. I've got a meeting at 11. I slid the manila envelope across the table. What's this? Open it. He did, pulling out the documents. I watched his face as he looked through them, the photographs first, which made him frown in confusion, then the letters, then the birth certificate. The color drained from his face. What the fuck is this? That, I said calmly, is proof that Dad had another son, an older son, named Christopher Sullivan, who legally has as much claim to Dad's estate as you do. This is bullshit. This is fake. You made this up. It's not fake. There's a paternity test from 1971, court documents from a child support case, letters spanning 30 years, private investigator reports. It's all real, Rick. Dad abandoned his first son and never told anyone. Rick was scanning through the documents frantically now, and I could see him realizing I was telling the truth. Even if this is real, he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. It doesn't matter. The will is clear. Dad left everything to me. This bastard son has no legal claim, except that Dad's will can be challenged on the grounds that he failed to provide for all his children. Christopher has just as much legal standing as either of us to contest the will. Christopher. Rick spat the name like it was poison. You've met him, haven't you? You found this convict or con artist or whatever he is, and now you're trying to use him to steal my inheritance. He's not a convict or a con artist. He's a mechanic, a good man with a family who struggled his whole life while Dad built an empire and pretended he didn't exist. I don't give a fuck who he is. Rick slammed his hand on the table, making other customers look over. He lowered his voice, but the venom remained. That money is mine. Dad left it to me, not to you, not to some random bastard from 50 years ago. Me. Actually, Dad left it to his beloved son, I said. Singular. But turns out he had 3 sons. 3 beloved sons, right, Rick? Or does Christopher not count because he was born to the wrong mother? You're doing this out of spite, Rick hissed. Because you're jealous. Because Dad knew I was worth something and you weren't. I'm doing this because it's right. Christopher deserves to know who his father was. He deserves his fair share. His fair share of money he did nothing to earn. Money that came from a company I've worked at for 15 years? Fuck that. Fuck him. And fuck you for trying to pull this. He stood up, grabbing the envelope. I'm taking these. I'm going to have my lawyers prove they're fake. Those are copies, I said calmly. The originals are in a safe deposit box. My lawyer already has them. Christopher's lawyer already has them. You can't make this go away, Rick. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my brother's eyes. You're destroying our family, he said. No, I replied. Dad destroyed it 50 years ago. I'm just bringing the truth to light. He stormed out without another word. The war had begun. Rick hired the most expensive law firm in New York. He fought dirty from day one. First, they tried to claim the documents were forgeries. That lasted about 2 weeks until independent handwriting, Experts and DNA evidence proved everything was authentic. Then they tried to argue that Christopher had waited too long to claim his inheritance, that the statute of limitations had passed. But Christopher's lawyers argued that he couldn't have claimed something he didn't know existed, that our father had deliberately hidden his identity, which essentially told the statute. The judge agreed. Rick tried to settle early on, offering Christopher $2 million to go away quietly. Christopher turned it down. "It's not about the money anymore," Christopher told me over the phone in late April. "It's about recognition. My mom died believing the man she loved was ashamed of her, ashamed of me. I want the world to know that we existed, that we mattered." The media got wind of the story in May 2019 and it exploded. Real estate mogul's secret son battles for inheritance was everywhere. TMZ camped outside Christopher's shop. Rick refused all interview requests, but his wife Amanda gave a statement calling Christopher a gold digger trying to profit from a dead man. Christopher gave exactly one interview to a local Portland news station. "My mother was a good woman," he said simply. "She loved a man who didn't love her back and she paid for it for the rest of her life. I'm not here to trash Richard Harrison's memory. I'm just here to claim what's rightfully mine, what should have been mine all along." The interview went viral. Public sentiment swung heavily in Christopher's favor. Rick was furious. He started calling me daily, leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails. "You destroyed our family for nothing. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. Dad would be ashamed of you." That last one made me laugh. Dad should have been ashamed of himself. The case went to court in September 2019. It lasted 3 weeks. Rick's lawyers argued that the will was clear and should be honored as written, that my father had deliberately chosen to leave everything to Rick, that Christopher was a stranger trying to profit from a man he'd never met. Our lawyers, Christopher's and mine because I joined the suit officially, argued that Dad's will failed to account for all his legal children, that Christopher had been deliberately hidden and denied his birthright, that the estate should be divided equally among all 3 sons. On September 27, 2019, the judge made his ruling. We all sat in that courtroom, me, Christopher, Rick, waiting for the judge to speak. You could have heard a pin drop. Judge Patricia Holbrook was 60-something, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of family drama imaginable. She looked down at us with something like pity. "This is a tragic case," she began. "A case that highlights the very worst of human behavior, cowardice, abandonment, and the devastating ripple effects of secrets kept for decades." She looked directly at Rick. "Mr. Richard Harrison, Jr., your father's will may have been legally sound at the time it was written, but it was based on a fundamental deception, the concealment of his eldest son's existence. The law recognizes that a parent has an obligation to provide for all their children, not simply the ones they choose to acknowledge." Rick's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "Mr. Christopher Sullivan, the court finds that you are indeed the biological son of Richard Harrison, Sr., and that you were deliberately denied knowledge of your father's identity and resources throughout your life. This constitutes a profound injustice." Christopher sat perfectly still, but I could see his hands trembling in his lap. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that the estate of Richard Harrison, Sr., valued at approximately $82 million after final accounting, shall be divided equally among his 3 legitimate sons, Richard Harrison, Jr., Michael Harrison, and Christopher Sullivan. Each son shall receive 1/3 of the estate, approximately $27 million after legal fees and taxes." The courtroom erupted. Rick's lawyer immediately stood to object, but the judge gavelled him down. "Furthermore," she continued, "Mr. Christopher Sullivan is entitled to retroactive child support for the years 1970 through 1988, when he reached legal majority. While his mother received a settlement of $50,000, this court finds that amount to be grossly inadequate given Richard Harrison Sr.'s wealth at the time. An additional $2 million shall be paid to Mr. Sullivan from the estate before the remaining funds are divided." I couldn't breathe. We'd won. We'd actually won. "This court is adjourned." Rick didn't speak to me as we left the courthouse. He didn't even look at me. His face was purple with rage, and Amanda had to practically drag him away before he did something stupid. Christopher and I stood on the courthouse steps, news cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions. "How do you feel, Mr. Sullivan? What are you going to do with the money? Do you forgive your father? Christopher raised a hand and somehow everyone quieted down. I feel relieved, he said simply. Not because of the money, though that will change my family's life in ways I can barely imagine. I feel relieved because my mother's story has been told. Because the world knows she wasn't lying or making things up. She loved a man who abandoned her, and she raised me alone, and she deserves to be remembered for the strong, beautiful person she was. As for my father, he paused. I don't forgive him. I can't, but I don't hate him either. I just feel sad that he was such a coward. Sad for what could have been. What about your brother, Richard Jr.? A reporter called out. Christopher glanced at me. I have 2 brothers. Michael came to find me when he didn't have to. He gave me these documents when he could have destroyed them. He fought beside me when everyone said we'd lose. Michael is my brother in every way that matters. As for Richard Jr., I hope someday he'll see that this was never about taking something from him. It was about claiming something that was always mine. We left before the questions could continue. That night, Christopher and I and our families had dinner together at a nice restaurant in Manhattan. Jennifer and the girls had driven down for the verdict, and seeing Christopher with his daughters, knowing they'd grow up without financial stress, knowing they'd go to good colleges, knowing they'd be okay, made everything worth it. What are you going to do with your share? I asked him over dessert. First, pay off every single debt we have. Medical bills, credit cards, everything. Then I'm going to expand my shop, hire some employees, maybe open a second location, build something real that I can pass on to my girls. He smiled. What about you? Honestly, I don't know. It's still not real to me yet. I think I'll keep teaching. I love my job, but maybe I'll start a scholarship fund for students who can't afford college, kids whose parents can't help them. Give them the opportunities I never had. Dad would hate that, Christopher said. Yeah, I grinned. Yeah, he would. For 3 months, I heard nothing from Rick. No calls, no texts, no angry voicemails. Just silence. I should have known he was planning something. On December 15th, 2019, I got a call from Principal Anderson at Jefferson High School. Michael, I need you to come to my office now. Her tone made my stomach drop. What's wrong? Just, please come in. When I got there, she had a stack of papers on her desk and a lawyer sitting beside her. My lawyer. Michael, you're being sued, the lawyer said without preamble. By your brother Richard. For what? He already lost the inheritance case. Not for that. He's suing you for defamation, emotional distress, and alienation of familial affection. He's claiming that you deliberately orchestrated a conspiracy to destroy his reputation and steal his inheritance. He's seeking damages of $50 million. I laughed. I couldn't help it. That's insane. He can't actually think he'll win. He doesn't need to win, my lawyer said grimly. He just needs to make your life hell for the next few years. Depositions, court appearances, legal fees. He's trying to drain your inheritance with legal costs. And Michael. There's more. What? Principal Anderson slid a folder across her desk. A private investigator has been talking to students and parents, asking questions about your teaching methods, your relationships with students, whether you've ever behaved inappropriately. Someone is trying to build a case against you. My blood ran cold. Rick? We don't know that for sure, Principal Anderson said, but her eyes said she knew exactly who it was. But several parents have filed formal complaints based on these interviews. Vague complaints about favoritism, inappropriate jokes, making students uncomfortable. Nothing specific, nothing we can verify, but enough to make my life difficult. I'm afraid so. The school board wants to put you on administrative leave while we investigate. Are you fucking kidding me? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly. I've been teaching here for 8 years. I know, Michael. I believe you, but my hands are tied. These complaints have to be taken seriously. I sat back down, my head spinning. This was Rick's revenge. He couldn't take my money legally, so he was going to destroy my reputation instead. Take away my job, my students, everything I'd built. We'll fight this, my lawyer said. Both the lawsuit and the complaints. But I need you to be prepared. It's going to get ugly. He wasn't wrong. The next 6 months were the worst of my life. Rick's lawyers deposed everyone I knew. Friends, colleagues, ex-girlfriends. They dug through my social media, my emails, my text messages, looking for anything they could twist into evidence of bad character. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But that didn't stop the lawsuit from grinding forward. The school board investigation was worse. Every lesson I'd taught, every grade I'd given, every conversation I'd had with students was scrutinized. Parents who'd never complained before suddenly remembered concerning incidents. One mother claimed I'd made her son cry by criticizing his essay. I'd given him a B+ and gentle feedback on his thesis statement. Another father said I'd shown favoritism to female students. I'd recommended 3 students for a writing competition, 2 girls and a boy, based solely on merit. It was all bullshit, transparent bullshit, but it didn't matter. The investigation dragged on. I couldn't teach, couldn't see my students. The kids I'd mentored for years sent me messages asking what was happening, and I couldn't even explain because my lawyer said anything I said could be used against me. I was dying inside. Christopher called me every few days to check in. "Hang in there, Mike, we've got the best lawyers. They'll clear your name." But I was losing hope. In March 2020, right as COVID-19 was shutting down the world, I hit rock bottom. I was sitting in my apartment, unemployed, reputation in tatters, watching my legal fees pile up, wondering if Rick had won after all. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Michael Harrison?" An elderly woman's voice. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Dorothy Richardson. I was your father's secretary for 35 years. I sat up straight. "Okay, I heard about the lawsuit, about what your brother is doing to you, and I thought you should know something. Something about your father's will. What about it?" The will that was read at the lawyer's office wasn't the only one your father wrote. My heart stopped. "What?" 3 days before he died, your father came to my house. He was very weak, but he insisted. He gave me an envelope and made me promise to keep it safe. He said if his sons couldn't work things out on their own, I should give it to you. Not Richard. You specifically. What was in the envelope? Another will. A revised will, dated February 26, 2019, and a letter. For you. I drove to Dorothy's house that same day. She was 78 years old, living alone in a tidy house in New Jersey. She welcomed me with tea and sympathy. "Your father was a complicated man," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. "He wasn't always good, but at the end I think he tried to be better. He asked me about you a lot those last few months. Wanted to know if you were happy, if you were okay." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a legal document, a will, properly witnessed and notarized, dated February 26, 2019, 3 days before my father died, and a letter. In my father's handwriting. I read the will first. My lawyer would need to verify it, but it looked legitimate. And it was. It was completely different from the will that had been read in the lawyer's office. This will divided the estate into 4 parts: 25% to Richard Harrison, Jr. 25% to Michael Harrison, 40% to Christopher Sullivan, 10% to various charities. There was a clause explaining that Christopher received more because he'd been denied support his entire life. And there was a clause stating that if Richard contested the will or sued any family member, his share would be reduced to 5%, with the remainder going to Christopher. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely read my father's letter. "Dear Michael," it began. "If you're reading this, it means my sons couldn't work things out peacefully. It means Richard is probably being Richard, greedy, vindictive, unwilling to share. It means I have to clean up my own mess even from beyond the grave. I was a coward, Michael. I was a coward when I abandoned Margaret and Christopher. I was a coward when I favored Richard over you your entire life. I was a coward when I made my first will, leaving everything to Rick because I knew it would be easier, cleaner, less complicated. But 3 months ago, when I knew death was coming, I hired that private investigator to find Christopher. And when I saw his photos, saw how much he looked like me, saw how hard he'd worked to build a decent life despite having nothing, I felt ashamed. I realized I'd spent my whole life building an empire for the wrong son. Richard is like me, ambitious, ruthless, selfish. He doesn't need the money. He'd do fine on his own. You and Christopher are different. You care about people. You try to make the world better instead of just taking from it. So I left you that car, Michael. I left you those documents. I knew you'd find them. I knew you'd do the right thing. I knew you'd find Christopher and give him his chance. This was my test for you both. If you destroyed those documents, kept quiet, let Richard have everything, well then I'd been wrong about you. And this second will would never matter. But if you did the right thing, if you found Christopher, told him the truth, fought for justice, then you'd prove you were the sons I should have valued all along. I'm guessing Richard fought back. I'm guessing he's making your life hell right now. That's why I'm leaving these instructions with Dorothy, who will give them to you only if necessary. Michael, take this will to your lawyer. It supersedes the earlier one. It's properly executed, fully legal, and Richard can't contest it without losing almost everything. I'm sorry I wasn't a better father to you. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough. You were always enough. You were always the good son. Take care of Christopher. He's your brother and he deserved better from me. I love you, son. I'm sorry I didn't say it enough when I was alive. Dad, I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. My lawyer verified the will within a week. It was legitimate, properly witnessed, properly notarized, dated 3 days before Dad's death. The first will, the one that left everything to Rick, had been dated February 1st, 2019. This one superseded it completely. I called Christopher first. He gave you more, I told him. In the new will, you get 40%. You get what you should have gotten all along. Christopher was quiet for a long moment. Your dad did that, even though he never met me? Yeah, he did. And you're okay with it? You don't think it's unfair? Christopher, you spent 50 years getting nothing from him. You deserve every penny. More than that, honestly. You're a good man, Michael. I learned from the best. And I don't mean Dad. I called Rick next. We need to meet, I said. One more time. I'm not settling, he said immediately. I don't care what your lawyers say. Wait, Rick, just meet me. Tomorrow. Same Starbucks. I promise you'll want to hear this. He showed up late again, angrier than ever. His lawsuit had been floundering and his lawyers had told him he'd likely lose. What? He snapped, not even sitting down. I slid the new will across the table. He read it. I watched the color drain from his face for the second time in a year. This is fake, he said, but his voice wavered. It's not. My lawyer already verified it. It's dated 3 days before Dad died, which makes it his final will, the one that counts. He left everything to me. He changed his mind. And you know the best part? There's a clause in there. If you contest this will, or if you sue any family member, your share drops from 25% to 5%, which means your lawsuit against me, the one you filed to destroy my life, just cost you about $16 million. Rick sat down hard. Like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. You need to drop the lawsuit, I continued. Today. And you need to call off whatever investigators you hired to smear me at my school. You need to fix what you broke. Or what? Or nothing. You've already lost. I'm just giving you a chance to salvage something. $20 million is still more than most people see in 10 lifetimes, Rick. Take it. Walk away. Stop trying to destroy people just because you didn't get everything. He stared at the will for a long time. He really hated me, Rick said quietly. At the end, he really hated me. No, I said, and I meant it. He didn't hate you. He just finally saw you clearly, and he saw that you didn't need the money. You'd be fine without it. Christopher and I needed it more, needed it differently. I worked for that company for 15 years, Rick said. I earned that money. You worked in a company Dad built, getting paid the whole time. Christopher worked his whole life too, but he got nothing. Not from Dad, anyway. Until now, Rick stood up, the will crumpled in his fist. I'll drop the lawsuit, he said. I'll call off the investigators. But I'm never speaking to you again. You destroyed our family. Dad destroyed our family 50 years ago, I said. I just told the truth about it. He left without another word. 2 days later, his lawyers filed a notice of dismissal on the lawsuit. A week after that, Principal Anderson called to tell me the investigation had been closed. The parents who'd filed complaints had suddenly withdrawn them, saying they'd been mistaken. I was cleared to return to teaching. It's October 14th, 2020, and I'm sitting in Christopher's new house in Portland. Not an apartment, a house. 4 bedrooms, a big yard, and a good school district. His daughters are playing in the backyard, laughing. Jennifer is in the kitchen making dinner, humming to herself. Christopher is in his garage, his home garage, not the shop, working on a vintage boat engine just for fun. He saw me watching and grinned. Can you believe this is real? Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm going to be back in that tiny apartment, wondering how to pay rent. It's real, I assured him. You earned it. We earned it, he corrected. You found me, Mike. You didn't have to. I'd returned to teaching in September, and it felt like coming home. My students had made me a welcome back banner, and several of them had written letters to the school board defending me during the investigation, with my share of the inheritance, about $23 million after. Taxes and legal fees, I'd set up the Margaret Sullivan Memorial Scholarship Fund, providing full college scholarships to students from single-parent households who showed academic promise, but lacked financial resources. The first recipients, would start college in fall 2021. 10 students, full rides, in honor of a woman who'd struggled alone to give her son a better life. Christopher's share, roughly $37 million, had transformed his life. He'd expanded his business, bought his house, set up college funds for his daughters, and donated generously to breast cancer research in his mother's name. And Rick had taken his $20 million and disappeared from our lives. Last I heard, he'd moved to California and started his own real estate investment firm. We hadn't spoken since that day at Starbucks. I didn't miss him. You know what's weird? Christopher said, setting down his tools. I spent 50 years being angry at a father I never knew. Angry that he abandoned me, that he didn't care, that he left me with nothing. And now I'm not angry anymore. I'm sad for him. Sad that he missed knowing me, missed knowing his granddaughters, missed having a relationship with you that wasn't all about business and competition. He had all that money, all that success, and he was miserable. I have this. He gestured at his house, his family, his life. And I'm happy, really happy. So who really won? I smiled. You did. We did. That night we had dinner together, all of us. Jennifer, the girls, Christopher, and me. It felt like family, real family. After dinner, Christopher's oldest daughter, Emma, 7 years old, asked me, Uncle Mike, did you really help find my daddy's daddy? I glanced at Christopher, who nodded. I did, I said. Kind of. Was he a good man? That was a harder question. He was complicated, I said finally. He made a lot of mistakes. Big mistakes. But at the very end, I think he tried to do the right thing. He tried to fix what he'd broken. Mommy says you're a good man, Emma said. She says you helped our family when you didn't have to. My throat tightened. Your mom's very kind. Are you going to come back for Thanksgiving? She asked. Mommy's making pie. I looked at Christopher, who was smiling. Yeah, I said. Yeah, I'll be here for Thanksgiving. On October 16, 2020, exactly 1 year after finding those documents in my father's car, I did something I'd been putting off. I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Hadn't wanted to, but now, with everything settled, with the legal battles over and the truth finally out, I felt like I needed to say something. His gravestone was simple granite. Richard Harrison Sr., 1945-2019. Beloved father and businessman, beloved father. The irony was painful. I sat down on the grass next to his grave. It felt stupid talking to a dead man, but I did it anyway. Hey Dad, it's been a year. A hell of a year. The cemetery was quiet except for birds and distant traffic. I read your letter. About 100 times, actually. Trying to figure out if you meant it. If you really were sorry, or if you were just scared of judgment from beyond the grave. A squirrel ran up a nearby tree. I think you were both. Sorry and scared. I think at the end, you finally understood what you'd done. To Christopher, to his mom, to me. And you tried to fix it in the only way you knew how. With money. I pulled a blade of grass, twisted it between my fingers. It worked, mostly. Christopher's doing great. His daughters are beautiful. He's happy. And I'm happy. We found each other, Dad. Your 2 throwaway sons found each other and built something real. The wind picked up, rustling leaves across the cemetery. Rick's gone. Maybe forever. Maybe someday he'll come around, but I'm not holding my breath. You turned him into a smaller version of yourself. All ambition, no heart. And then you were surprised when he couldn't see beyond dollar signs. I stood up, brushing grass off my jeans. I don't forgive you. I can't. What you did to Christopher and his mom was unforgivable. But I understand you a little better now. You were flawed and human and scared. You made terrible choices. And at the very end, when it mattered, you tried to make one good choice. I put my hand on his gravestone. Thanks for that. Thanks for leaving me those documents. Thanks for trusting me to do the right thing. And thanks for finally seeing me. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Dad? That car you left me? I'm keeping it. Christopher and I are fixing it up together. We're going to get it running. Get it beautiful again. We're calling it the Brotherhood Project. Seemed fitting. I left the cemetery feeling lighter than I had in a year. Epilogue. 3 years later. It's October 16th, 2023. Christopher and I are standing in front of Sullivan's Marine Repair, the new location. The big one, right on Portland's working waterfront. The 1967 Chevrolet Impala is parked out front. Fully restored. Forest green and chrome, beautiful enough to make grown men weep. We finished it last month, working on it every weekend for 3 years. You ready? Christopher asks, holding a bottle of champagne. Ready? I say. We pop the bottle and spray it over the hood of the Impala, christening it like a ship. Christopher's daughters squeal and run through the spray, laughing. A small crowd has gathered, employees from Christopher's business, some of my former students who made the trip up from New York, Jennifer, and a few reporters covering the Secret Son inheritance follow-up story. 3 years ago, Christopher says to the crowd, I didn't know I had a brother. I didn't know my father's name. I was struggling to keep my tiny shop afloat and wondering how I'd pay for my daughter's future. He puts his arm around my shoulders. Then this guy showed up and changed my life. Changed everything. Not just with the inheritance, though that helped. Everyone laughs. But by giving me family. By giving me a brother who chose to do the right thing when he didn't have to. Speech, someone calls out. I shake my head, but Christopher pushes me forward. Okay, I say. I'll keep it short. 4 years ago, I thought I had nothing. I thought my father saw me as worthless. I thought I'd lost the genetic lottery, doomed to always be second best to my older brother. I look at Christopher. Turns out I had the wrong older brother. The real one, the one who deserved that title, was up here in Portland the whole time. Christopher taught me that family isn't about blood or wills or who Dad loved more. It's about showing up. It's about doing right by each other. It's about fixing broken things together, whether that's a car or a family. I gesture to the Impala. This car, the car that started everything, almost tore our family apart. Our father left it to me as a test, or maybe as an apology, or maybe just because he didn't know what else to do. But Christopher and I turned it into something else. We turned it into a promise, a symbol, a reminder that beautiful things can come from broken ones. Christopher raises his champagne glass. To brotherhood, he says. To brotherhood, I echo. We drink, and everyone cheers. Later, as the sun sets over Portland Harbor, Christopher and I sit in the Impala, just the two of us. The engine purrs perfectly. We'd rebuilt it from scratch. You ever hear from Rick? Christopher asks. No, you? Nope. Think we ever will? Maybe. Maybe when he runs out of people to be angry at and realizes what he lost. Think he'll apologize? I consider this. No, but I hope he finds some peace eventually. He's still our brother, even if he doesn't want to be. You're more generous than I'd be. I learned from someone pretty forgiving, I say. Someone who had every reason to be angry at his father but chose understanding instead. Christopher smiles. We did okay, didn't we? With our shitty inheritance? We did better than okay. We won. Yeah, he agrees, looking out at his business, his life, his family. Yeah, we did. I start the engine of the Impala and it roars to life, powerful, beautiful, alive. Ready for a drive? I ask. Always, Christopher says. And we drive off into the Portland evening. Two brothers who found each other in the wreckage of their father's secrets. Two sons who turned a broken inheritance into something worth more than $80 million could ever buy. We turned it into family,